A century later. A century on from the founding of the social credit movement, the present period displays profound changes and enduring similarities. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020, the greatest change attributable to Douglas is in the response to economic crisis. In the late 1920s and the 1930s, the response to economic hardship was one of tightening the belts, foreclosing on mortgages, reducing wages and employment, dumping and destroying unsaleable production, and restricting credit. Of course, this made the Depression even worse. Three things broke this thinking. One of these things was Douglas's seminal thinking and irrefutable diagnosis, which, though vigorously resisted, provided the initial impetus towards reform. The second, and far more powerful force, was the sheer impact of the economic disaster on human lives of abject poverty in the midst of self-evident plenty. And finally, there was war. A war cannot be fought without the financial means of doing so. Germany, where economic hardship and militarism were greater, was the first of the dominoes to fall. They elected a strong man who threw aside financial orthodoxy to fund his war and the industrial basis to fight it. John Kenneth Galbraith, a prominent American Keynesian, said that it was not Keynes who ended the Depression, but Hitler, for deflation had to be ended to defeat him. A Great Depression and a worldwide war at great price changed the common response to economic crisis. The economic lockdown caused by the pandemic of 2020 brought a universal response where all nations, with one accord, spent to support consumption. In the post-scarcity modern economy, consumption is the driving force and powerhouse of the economy, not production. Unlike the 1930s, advertising now pervades all forms of human communication to an invasive extent because all know that the problems of production in advanced economies have been solved. Selling the burgeoning merchandise and services is the difficulty. So if the change from reducing expenditure to increasing it in a crisis is the greatest change in a century, what is the greatest similarity? Douglas essentially suggested two things. Firstly, purchasing power should be increased, and secondly, it should be done without increasing debt. J.M. Keynes was the agent promoted by finance to reflate the economy, but his method was debt. It remains inconceivable that an economy should have increased purchasing power without an increase in debt. President Lincoln created $450 million with his issue of greenbacks without increasing American debt at all. But modern monetary theory just can't get it. There is a bill before the US Congress, the ABC bill, to issue $1 trillion coins, have the Federal Reserve Bank purchase them, and pay all Americans $2,000 per month by giving everyone debit cards to get the economy through the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. It will not be passed. Why? The answer is cerebral incomputability. It comes down to the same reason why we must agree that there is no intelligent life in outer space. It's completely obvious once we understand that there is no evidence for intelligent life at all, because there is none evident on Earth. In some respects, this may be seen as a bit harsh, but modern monetary theorists certainly suffer from severe cerebral incomputability. Cosmologists don't. Modern antimatter theory began in 1928 with a paper by Paul Dirac, which science has since confirmed. Instead of protons with a positive charge and electrons attracted to them with a negative charge, antiprotons and positrons, anti-electrons, have equal mass but opposite charges. Upon contact, matter and antimatter annihilate each other, leaving a sum total of nothing at all. The same thing happens when a credit meets a debit. So we apparently have debt of about $250 trillion on Earth at the moment, June 2020. If this debt met $250 trillion of credit, both would annihilate. There would be nothing left at all except everything that was real. This is too terrifying to contemplate, apparently, in modern monetary theorizing. Since we have a pandemic, we've added a few trillion to our debt. Why didn't we add credit? Well, we just never thought of it. If you hand an economist or a politician a thought like this, he or she will always smack it down. Oh, the horror of such a challenging idea. This is as it was 100 years ago. The world is, of course, different, though it is the same in many other ways too. A century ago, we were so rich that we didn't have to send our wives out to work. Houses were cheap, costing only about 2 years' work. Production with technology and modern processes is mostly about 10 times easier now and quicker, though leisure is no more abundant. We communicate 100 times more easily, though the result is usually, or at least often, 99% trivia. If Douglas is right, though, and the interests of man, which is self-development, is so, how are we faring? How are we physically, intellectually, morally, materially, spiritually, and in the trustworthiness of our relationships? If self-development is our purpose, what are the greatest assets that serve us in this? Putting aside those things without which we do not live at all, food, clothing, and shelter, what would afford the greatest advantage in developing ourselves? Self-development is surely, at least for responsible, self-examined lives, best served by self-directed efforts. The uniqueness of personality, talents, and inclinations prescribes 1,000,000 masters for 1,000,000 persons. What physicist or cosmologist could direct a Mozart in his creative life? What musician or athlete could have usefully supervised Newton? The greatest poverty in all the world, the direst dearth of the most needful, the most despotic imposition impoverishing self-development, is the intelligent use of the fourth dimension. It is called leisure. Time, reflection, self-knowing, self-impelled service, and conceptual understandings of such things as love, gratitude, grace, and the glory inherent in others need a dimension in space. Yes, they need leisure. The fiercest enemy upon all the earth to leisure, even of the possibility of developing the instinct for leisure, is full employment. What? You advocate laziness and sloth? Not at all. I prefer self-development to self-abrogation where it can be had. Is it axiomatic that time undetermined by despots is prescribed as an appendage without censure? It's not about what or who you are, or what you do or don't have, or why the square root of -1 is a quandary. It's about your room to become yourself, your real space, your you-ishness, if you can find it, and your ability to include us in either the modesty or the glory of your uniqueness.